But let's talk about tariffs. So FedEx sues the U.S. government seeking full refund over Trump's tariffs. Rob, if you got that clip, let's start off with that, because the first story we heard was, FedEx, but it didn't end with FedEx. There's many more names that are coming out. Go ahead, Rob.
FedEx is suing the Trump administration just days after the Supreme Court ruled most of his tariffs are illegal. The company is asking for a full refund of all the payments it made to the government under its tariff policies. Let's go live to Market Watch Bureau Chief Rob Schroeder. Rob, thank you for your time today. So what is the procedure here? What is it going to look like for companies who are seeking to get a refund?
After the Supreme Court's really quite earth-shaking decision last week to deny or to really reject several of President Trump's tariffs that he had used to collect duties. So what's happening now in the case of FedEx, for example, is they're going to what's called the Court of International Trade against the Trump administration in hopes, in desires that they get a refund. Now, this promises to be quite a long process, as the president himself suggested, taking as many as 5 years.
It could take as long as 5 years. It could take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Kevin O'Leary was talking about the other day how problematic it is. I'll give you guys some numbers here, and then Kenneth, I'll come to you first. You got $175 billion right now is what we're looking at. L'Oreal, Dyson, I think Prada, a couple other companies, Costco, Revlon are also those that filed suits before. Over 1,000 importers total filed similar refund claims post-ruling, spanning large corporations and smaller importers for a total of about $175 billion. What do you think is going to happen here, Kenneth?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that most of them do get their money back, that, if this was an illegal tariff, then the United States has to pay it back. On the other hand, $175 billion, that's a lot of money, but not in the context of the U.S. budget. It's kind of like chump change in terms of things. And I'm sure the president and his economic advisors knew this might happen. They knew they might have to pay it back and fill it in other ways and view it as collateral damage for their strategy. I also want to say that, there's all this drama over tariffs. If you had 15% tariffs all over the world, we economists don't favor that. There'd be a lot of costs. I don't think it would be efficient. It's not the end of the world. A lot of the dramatic effects of tariffs come from, we don't know what's going on. When we had Liberation Day, the problem wasn't the tariffs. The problem was, you had this chart that didn't really make sense, and people are thinking, oh my God, he's got his finger on the trigger, what's he thinking? But, the tariffs themselves are not the issue. It's getting some certainty. And we don't have it now because we don't know what will work. We don't know what won't work. We had all these deals, and now suddenly, the UK had 10%. Now it's 15%, and they say, what gives? And of course, there are many things playing out here. But at the end of the day, this is more about a fight for power than it is specifically about some tax.
Tom, where are you at with this?
So, people like to say, oh, the tariffs were illegal. The tariffs themselves were not illegal, and CBS is calling the tariffs illegal. What the Supreme Court said, very narrowly, keep me honest here, was the president did not have the authority to put those things in place because he needed to get permission from Congress. These were not like illegal or backdoor extortion. This was normal negotiation, the way tariffs have been used for 100 years. And you could debate whether tariffs are good or bad. These tariffs did not create runaway inflation as predicted. The market calmed down because, as you pointed out, and you're correct, the market didn't have certainty on Liberation Day. And the market, as they say, freaked the F out on April 2nd of last year. But then the market came back. So these tariffs are not illegal. President didn't have permission from Congress, but if Congress got together tomorrow morning, Pat, and simply stated, we hereby ratify the tariffs as implemented by the president and voted, that simple vote would retroactively tell the whole world, hey, we're all together here, we're behind the president, and you better deal with these, and you've negotiated trade deals with us, so the guy that's negotiating with you and Witkoff and Bessent and Rubio and everybody that was involved, hey, we're behind our leadership, deal with it. That's all they have to do, Pat. A vote by the U.S. Congress that says, we hereby retroactively ratify that we approve the tariffs as enforced as they are today. There you go.
Yeah. The question is, will that happen?
No, that's not going to happen because it's anything but Trump.
Of course. So the problem, to me, it's a circle. Like the Constitution protects against a dictator coming in and choosing to do everything they want to do. That's not Trump. I support what Trump was doing with this, and not because it affected us negatively as well. We buy products from many of these countries that we go back and forth from. We're right now in Italy, and we are in the shoe business and the fashion business. So we're dealing with the tariffs that you have to buy, and we eat the costs in many cases. But for me, it was more about what China was going to do. And you see here, Xi gains leverage before Trump summit after tariff reversal. Bloomberg writes that article. You don't think Xi knows he got the leverage now? You don't think these countries now sit there? Macron asks Trump to lift sanctions on European officials, right? U.S. tells partners you better honor tariff deals as Trump regroups. Even yesterday, he talked about it in a State of the Union when he said most of the countries we're speaking to are still willing to go with the agreements we made, meaning even though Supreme Court ruled against us, they're still willing to negotiate with us in that way. So he needs that fear. A leader has three different things that you're dealing with: respect, likability, and fear. Okay, so likability, he tends to be likable when he's negotiating, he's charming, like you talked about earlier, right? Respect, we have some of that respect. You need a little bit of the fear. Nobody feared Biden. Nobody feared Obama when you're negotiating. You didn't fear these guys. We need a little bit of fear. America hasn't been feared in a long time. We haven't had somebody that comes in. And my biggest concern was China. So I kind of like that this was here, but then it was out. And it was so important that yesterday, Rob, if you want to play the clip, when the president was coming in and how he walked past Amy Coney Barrett, Rob, if you want to play that clip, this is not the one, it's the other one. I send you two of the clips. Yeah, I texted to you a minute ago. If you look at the clip I just sent you, Rob, if you just check your text, I texted to you directly to your text right there. Watch this, folks. Go ahead. Okay? So one by one.
We just saw the president obviously shake the Chief Justice's hand. There's Justice Elena Kagan, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. Of course, he chose Amy Coney Barrett for the bench. She was one of the justices who did not vote in his favor and did not shake her hand there. Did interact with the Chief Justice, but then with none of the other justices. And John Carl, this was a question for the president today. Obviously, didn't want to go on the record, didn't offer any answer to us.
What do you think about that?
But it was clear to us.
You can pause it right. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think Tom had it right that the Supreme Court ruling was correct, that it wasn't that tariffs are illegal. It was that the procedure was illegal. And I have a feeling Trump and his people knew this was coming all the time. What taking this ruling has meant has been that he can't use it as capriciously as he's been doing, which he's a good negotiator and sometimes uses it effectively. On the other hand, I have friends who run small businesses. It has been brutal on them because not only are there the tariffs and you don't know what's coming, but there are actually a lot of costs, administrative costs, if you're a small business, if you're importing. It's not just that you're paying the 15, 20%, but there are all these other fees that places like FedEx and others are charging because they have to do all this paperwork that they didn't have to do before. So I think a thing that hasn't been talked about enough is how tough this has been on small businesses, this uncertainty. Maybe it's for the larger good, but it's not been painless.
Yeah, there is something to that, and I think maybe optimal way to do it would be to exempt small businesses under a certain size. But I think that this is outrageous by the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court has acquired too much power since the Constitution was created, and they look at this like an economic thing, but I think it's a matter of national security. Like, Rob, if you could pull up the picture I sent you, these things that whether it's semiconductors, advanced chips, aerospace, rare earth mining, rare earth refining, less than 10% of those things are manufactured in the U.S. So if that's not a matter of national security, I don't know what is. And the the primary goal, if not one of the many goals of the tariffs, is to get those things back to the U.S. to be produced in the U.S. because it's impossible to compete with a country that pays slave wages to produce items, because obviously it's going to be cheaper to have manufactured in a different country and brought over here. So I didn't even think the tariffs were a strong enough measure to enforce that, but they were a step in the right direction. So, how do we solve for that? How do we solve for being undersold by, third world countries or countries like China who could produce something for a fraction of what we could produce it for? And when they're critical to our national security, which is why I think it is a false ruling by the Supreme Court. It is a matter of national security. It's not just an economic matter.
And I think a lot of people also voted for that, right? The idea was to bring it here. Let's find a way to bring it here. But I think, Brandon, to go through that, what did he say yesterday? Remember the $18.5 trillion number? Under Biden, the investments of foreign investment coming in was less than $1 trillion and a lot less than $1 trillion. But I have gotten the commitment over $18.5 trillion and a lot more than $18 trillion of foreign investment coming in here. Okay, that's good. The challenge is America's not going to feel that right away.
No.
That $18 trillion is going to take how long?
Yeah,
I don't
years,
know, 5,
decade.
10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
Buy the land, build the factory, hire the people. It takes a minute.
So the problem is some of these ideas that are good ideas and the pain to go through the tariffs of making sure you put China in check, put some of these other countries in check, you can't fix that in 13 months.
Yeah.
And you said we don't know if it's going to work or not, right?
But it was sort of a war on everyone. I mean, so I'm all for national security and thinking about just things like the drugs that we use. We found that out in the pandemic. We were importing everything from India and China. We didn't have control over it. So there are things which are national security, but is wine national security? Is everything national security? And I think, if he uses them under these other mechanisms, he can target those things. But the trouble is, as a negotiator, he just wanted, free form to do whatever he wanted. If he didn't like putting Bolsonaro in jail in Brazil, if he didn't like the free speech law in the UK, he would do something. And I think reining that in was good.
You think reining that in was good?
Yeah, you focus it on national security, that's fine, but not necessarily every whim that you have. That was, I think, really what seemed odd about the whole
So I'm going to
thing.
ask you a crazy question. This wasn't even on the topic, Tom. This goes to both of you. And you're a national security guy. You got your bachelor's and master's in national security. So your thoughts on this as well is, so if the ruling comes back and they say, well, yeah, you never had the authority to put the tariffs on all these countries, 6-3, Supreme Court's against you. Really? Yeah. Even the other two that I appointed, yes, they also ruled against you. What? So I put them there, but they're ruling against me. Yes, got it. All right, but all you have to do is put it through Congress to get it passed. No problem. Well, guess what? If you're sending B-2 or B-52 bombers to go help, blow up the 6 nuclear site Iran has, some people are saying you also need to run that through Congress first. Okay. There's also hey, you need to get that approval. Hey, the stuff that we're doing with Iran, you also need Congress approval. Doesn't that make everything that before you make a decision like that, you have to go, and then how do you become unpredictable to the enemy? An element that the president needs to be unpredictable. Instead, it's like, no, hey guys, we're about to attack you at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Be ready. We're coming to you. Can that argument be made for that as well with Iran?
That's why the immunity was important.
It's very important. The executive order is the mechanism for the president to do exactly what you're talking about. However, there are these limits. As a matter of fact, I believe it was Massey and Ro Khanna, Rob, can you look this up, who are pushing a war powers resolution to force the president to come to Congress to get approval for things like that, exactly as you point out. But it was Massey and Ro Khanna a week ago talking about pushing something forward so that the president has to go through Congress. Section 5 of War Powers, right, from unauthorized hostilities. And this is Massey supported by Kana. So they're doing the same thing. They're trying to get this resolution started, Pat. Exactly what you're talking about.
That's crazy.
They're saying, hey, you needed to come to us from this, so now you need to come for us for this. But what people don't understand, leaders have to be unpredictable. Leaders have to take measures. Now, the president, as commander-in-chief, is allowed to do a variety of things militarily. And he has the executive order pen. Those are the things where he can act.
Can't they keep coming back to you, though? Can Congress keep coming back and say, like Rand Paul was right. I was with Rand Paul a month ago.
There it is.
And Rand Paul says, hey.
February 19th.
Yeah, Rand Paul says, hey, you realize if, I said, so do you think Supreme Court's going to rule against them or for them? If they follow the law, they're going to rule against them on the tariffs. He said this a month ago. He ended up being right. So now can the same argument be made against anything he does with Iran? What if they do what they're doing to Iran and something doesn't go right? Can they come back and say, hey, you went against the Constitution?
I think you need
this is the War Powers Act, and this is what Kana and Massey threatened to force a vote on Iran as prospective U attack looms. That's what they're testing. They're testing War Powers Act.
Why wouldn't you test it? What I'm saying is,
if you're against him, you would test.
So does this push it back to Supreme Court? Does it go back to Congress?
I mean, everybody's always fighting for power. So there's, the president wants more power, the Congress wants more power, the Supreme Court wants more power. Everybody's fighting for power. And part of, the democracies and their balance of power is deciding, where it goes. I think on economic stuff, being unpredictable is not so great. I mean, occasionally a negotiation, but I have a friend who imports wines from Italy and a very small business, and the unpredictability is really hard to deal with. For most people, you want to invest. You want to know what's going on. Like, can I rely on something in 3 to 5 years if I invest? But obviously for military strategy, it's like the last thing we want is for our enemy, our adversary to know. So, yeah, I mean, these are things that constantly need to be talked about and debated. I think on the economic side, the case for having, more process. That's really what happened on the tariff ruling. There are all these other mechanisms you can use. They just require a little more process, a little more procedure. And I think the Supreme Court actually very openly was saying, please use these instead. They weren't saying we're going to ban everything. We just, this door, maybe this approach you shouldn't use.
It's too slow, though, for him. And remember, he's a capitalist. He's an operator. He comes from the private market, where if you don't move fast, you get killed. He's a CEO. Right? In politics, everything is super slow.
Well, that's fine. But in economic policy, like, would you want to know if your tax rate on your company was going to be 50% or 10% 2 years from now? You'd kind of like to know that if you're making an investment. So the unpredictability for ordinary people, for small businesses, is not great. There are cases where, they're different horses for different courses, I guess, as they say.
But we have to compete with countries who are able to move at light speed, though. I mean, look, what Russia took their interest rates to 22% when we put the sanctions on them, and they were able to stabilize their economy. So, I mean, you kind of have to be able to swiftly move if the other countries are doing things to you.
Well, for sure. No, but that's a case of if you're in a crisis. Russia was in a huge crisis.
I think we're in a crisis with what Trump's trying to combat against.
Well, we're in a much more slow-moving crisis than what Russia was doing. And I think there are crises in America. There are things that are going really well. And you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, that's the balance.
There's two problems on economics. The first one is that we need to understand that our Congress is heavily influenced by foreign lobbyists. China and others, we need to understand that. The president has to work against that, because otherwise his negotiations on economics will get completely undermined. Your comment about consistency and predictability is correct on one line. Because there was so much unpredictability and so much dirt being thrown into the air by the Democrats, that's what happened on April 1st, the stock market. It didn't understand the tariffs. It thought there was going to be runaway inflation. Everybody was all full negative, and the market was unpredictable. And the market, what did it do? It shifted equities to bonds in a single day. Boom. And you saw the market come down, and then it came back. Why? Because everything was okay. Nobody got hurt. No bomb was thrown off. So the president needs to have that unpredictability dealing with other people. I mean, look at the trouble we had with Canada. Canada's 2.1 trillion, 2.3 trillion GDP, slightly larger than Russia, and we're 31. And this gnat was sitting there creating these hostilities because he was handcuffed. You have to be able, as a leader, to lead in these things. You do want economic consistency, but when you're really trying to break two things, all these entanglements with your own Congress, who are bought and influenced by foreign governments, you have to break that. So he has to have that pen and that power to break through that. Because in a normal circumstance, if we had rational representatives, you grab an economic committee, you say, this is the play we got to call. We need to do this, this, and this because of steel and China. Are we all in? Great. Okay, we're going to go. Hut, hut, hike. Unfortunately, if you go and tell all those people, they've got lobbyists,
Kenneth,
they've got people, then everybody knows about it.
But let's be careful. We're talking about the long-term balance of power. Again, we could have a President Mamdani, not him in particular, a president in a few years. And do you want them to have all this power without Congress to be a check on it? I have to say, one of the things that upset me a lot about what the Democrats wanted before the election was they wanted to get rid of the filibuster. Biden said that. President Obama said that. Nancy Pelosi said that. And it's so short-sighted. They wanted to get rid of the filibuster because they wanted, much more power when they were in power. They didn't want any checks and balances. I think of the filibuster is one of the fundamental things that we have. And to their credit, the Republicans, even when Trump has pushed them, have not gone along with that. So we're not just talking about today. You like Trump, you like what he's doing. What about the next guy or woman? What about it? So, that's where the problem lies. I
That
think
was the Gorsuch argument.
So yeah, that's where I have the concern.
So getting rid of the filibuster gets what? It makes the Senate, instead of 60 out of 100 to 51?
Yeah, you get a tiny majority, and you just do whatever you want. They wanted to make Puerto Rico and Washington, into Senate seats in order to cement things. They could just pass any law. I mean, the filibuster is they made a big mistake back, I think it was under Obama, when they took away the filibuster for most court appointments, thinking, not thinking a couple moves ahead, if I can be the chess player in me. And I think we have to be careful also, if you want President Trump to have more executive power, that it's not something that somebody that follows him that inherits. We have the greatest country in the world, 250 years. It's worked really well. And you've got to be really careful about upsetting a balance of power that has worked. And I understand the paralysis. There was this New York Times article 4 or 5 years ago that got me very upset that said, we're going to only get to the end of this when one side has all the power, meaning I think the progressives have all the power. Now the shoe is on the other foot. I don't think that's a good thing. I think we have to, figure out how to reestablish this balance. And that's going to take Congress stepping up.
Will they? Will they is the question. But look, to me, the more and more we get into this debate, and both sides of the argument are given, Tom, like what you're saying and then what he's saying about Mamdani, even though he's not born here, but a Mamdani type of person could become president. Let's say AOC, who is born here, could be that. The Supreme Court, to me, gives me confidence about the future. The Constitution, how it's set up, gives me confidence about the future. That even a crazy, psycho, progressive, socialist commie that becomes a president, how much can he or she get done? Are they going to be locked in on how much they can do? Of course, they can sell their ideology, confuse the kids, and go back to some of those opened a border, and what Biden did, opening the border for 4 years and getting to 10, 12, 15, 20 million, whatever the number is. That's a massive crisis. But even with that crisis, if you actually think about this, Tom, Kenneth, so they opened the border for 4 years. Every month we had to hear why it's tough to close it and how much work it takes. Every month we had to see interviews of Border Patrol guys. We're not allowed to do this. We have to catch and release. We can't do that. They're not letting us do this. What do you mean they're not? They're not. When's the last time Kamala Harris came here? The borders are, we can't come. Eventually, one time she came, and I don't know where she went, Guatemala or whatever. it is that she ended up doing. But where was the Supreme Court against that? Where was the Congress protecting? So that playbook to me, if I'm a Democrat, I'm like, guys, every 4 years, if we get into the office, open up the borders again. Open up the borders again. Eventually, within 50 years, we're going to dominate this entire thing. Then Republicans are like, what do you mean you're going to open up the borders? And so, okay, I dare you. Go ahead and get rid of the people that came here illegally. Go ahead. What's going to happen if you get rid of people illegally? You're going to get an Alex Preddy. You're going to get a, what's her first name? What's her first? Rachel Good, right? You're going to get a Rachel Good. And then what happens when you get a Rachel Good and Alex Preddy? Then the other side uses they're killers. Ilhan Omar was screaming that yesterday, I believe.
They're gunning
right?
us down in the street.
So to me, on one end, one has to follow the laws, but on the other end, you're allowed to put 12 million people here and nobody was held accountable. What happened there? How does Supreme Court or Congress protect us with that? Is this it, Rob? Play
Yes,
this
sir.
clip, and then I want to go to Kenneth. Go ahead, Rob.
Sanctuary cities that protect the criminals and enact serious penalties for public officials who block the removal of criminal evidence.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
In many cases, drug lords,
It's coming up.
murderers all over our country, they're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Pause it right there. So it's legal for them. Was anybody held accountable for letting 10, 15 million people in?
No.
Where's the accountability?
Well, the accountability, hopefully, is in our democracy. It was one of the dumbest things they did, not only economically, socially, but politically. I mean, I think that if I were the Republicans, I'd hope the Democrats stick to that position forever.
How?
Oh, I mean, it helped. It was one of the big issues for President Trump and the Republicans in getting elected in
But if you
2024.
keep doing that in 3-5 terms and Americans are not making babies and you keep pushing LGBTQ and LGBTQ gets younger kids to transition and like the same sex, and we know science doesn't show that same sex can make babies, so birth rate goes to 1.58, and then you get control of Hollywood and all the movies and cartoons you make to confuse the hell out of the kids. That's a great combination strategically long term. Keep bringing illegals in, open the floodgates for 4 years, do that 4 or 5 times over 50 years. We own the vote for 50 years.
Well, I want to be a little more optimistic about it. I mean, I have to say I've come from a very liberal university, and different people have different views on this, and there's some balance. And I think the Democrats push too hard in one direction, and they're paying for it. These are fantastic issues for the Republicans, because I think a lot of people, feel the Democrats went much further than you see in other countries on a lot of these issues. They have a lot less immigration in Europe, and they're so angry about it. It's the biggest issue there. I believe in legal immigration, by the way. I think that's really important. We should have more of it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's being lost in this debate, that we need more of that. But yeah, there's not I don't have a simple answer to this.
You know what I'm saying, right? To me,
I hear you.
I love that you're saying the Supreme Court, the long-term balance of power. I love it. You're right. I'm with that. As much as to me, I was for the tariffs going because I wanted to see where that negotiation was going to lead to. And the moment Besson started saying, even if Supreme Court ruling goes against that, we have other plans. But, okay, Supreme Court, okay, Congress, protect us from the next person being able to open up the borders and getting 10 or 15 million people. And when the Republicans come in, what are they going to campaign on? When Trump campaigned on, we're going to get rid of the illegal immigrants. You know what I said to myself? I said to myself, how are you going to do without being seen as a cruel, horrible human being? What a great marketing story. I don't care what you do. You're going to go politely say to people, hey, Kenneth, you came here illegally with your family of 6. You came from Michoacan, Jalisco. We need you to go back home. Okay, America, I'm going to go back home legally because you said so. No, that's not how it's going to. So where's the accountability? Nothing.
Well, I don't know if this is going through their heads when they're looking at it. I really don't. But certainly until recently, the view was if you got in, you were eventually going to be made a citizen. The U.S. would always have an amnesty every once in a while, and you got to be a citizen. And everybody thought that.
Dream Act.
Yeah. Now, you think, well, okay, maybe the Mamdani candidate gets in 4 years. They open up the border. you got to think a little bit more because they might not be there in 4 years and you have to worry. I'm not trying to approve of it or not approve of it, but, that does lay down a marker, I suppose, in being so tough.
Yeah, if we come up with the voter ID, then they can't open up the floodgates of. So if when they're like, well, no, voter ID is racist because you're asking African Americans who can't go out there and do that. They can't find their passports, and all these people that have all this job they're working to, they don't have time to go to the DMV and get a new voter ID. What are you talking about? No, you don't want the voter ID because we get it. How many states do you not need a picture ID to go vote with? So we know the games as well. I believe if they do the voter ID, the opening up the borders won't work anymore because that playbook doesn't work. This is the scariest thing for the Democratic Party if voter ID passes. What is the strategy of letting the floodgates open up? It's a very... Anyways, we can get past this and go to the economy. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Different types of sales leaders I've worked with the last 20 years. One of them are those that are a boss, that are telling you what to do. One of them is one that wants to be a friend. He wants to say, hey, Johnny, let me help you get to this next level. And then the other one is the leader that's sitting down with you, accountable, challenge, pushing you. You can do more, expectation, business planning. Each one of them has pros and blind spots. Once a year, I host an event called the Sales Leadership Summit. This year, we're doing it at the beautiful Trump Doral, March 25th through the 27th, where we talk about topics like this, 200 plus pages in a manual where people from around the world, you have to do a minimum of $1 million a year and 5 salespeople to qualify to attend this. So if you're someone that's watching and saying, I think I'm like a boss, I think I'm like a friend, I think I'm a leader, I want to find my blind spots, click on a link below, fill out the information. One of our consultants will get a hold of you.
Click on a link. I do believe the executive tickets have sold out, but there's 2 other tier tickets for those that want to find out about it. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.